and welcome to Transfer Talk. Conor Gallagher's on his way to Atletico Madrid as he decides to make the move to the La Liga club. We'll have the very latest for you coming up. He could be joined by Manchester City's Julian Alvarez. He too could be joining up with Diego Simeone. And we're joined in the studio by European football expert Andy Brassel. We'll be discussing all the big deals, including whether Victor Osimhen could end up in the Premier League. But first, we start with the sad news that former England cricketer Graham Thorpe has passed away at the age of 55. We can speak to our reporter James Cole now, who is at the Oval for us, where Graham spent his domestic career playing for Surrey. James, what has been the reaction to this tragic news?
He is a Surrey legend. There's been an outpouring of grief and tributes from Surrey today. He spent all 17 years of his professional career here at Surrey. 189 first-class games. He finished with an average of 45. The Surrey flag is flying at half-mast here today, and it was Surrey Cricket Club who broke the news, the very sad news, this morning. They released a statement. Their chair, Ollie Slipper, said Graham is one of the great sons of Surrey, and there is an overwhelming sadness that he will not walk through the gates of the Oval again. He is a legend of Surrey and brought great pride to the club, wearing both the 3 feathers and the 3 lions. Surrey Chief Executive Steve Elworthy has added everyone associated with the club is devastated by the tragic news of Graham's passing. He achieved remarkable feats for club and country and was a hero to so many cricket fans. Our thoughts and condolences are with Graham's family and friends, to whom we will offer any support that we are able to. We ask that everyone respects the privacy of the family at this incredibly difficult time.
Well, he had a fantastic career, James, with England, didn't he? How highly is he regarded as not just a player, but as a coach as well?
He was one of the greatest Test batsmen of his generation. 100 Tests for England. 6,744 Test runs, but that doesn't tell the whole story. He was a brilliant player of spin, a real gritty player as well, exemplified in some of his finest innings. There was a 7-hour ton in Lahore against Pakistan that included just 1 boundary. Then there was a match-winning 113 in 2001 against Sri Lanka in Colombo, when he ground out that innings again against spin to lead England over the line. His career was littered with big scores, particularly against spin, but he also had that period where he was out of the game for 13 months. He was suffering the breakup of his marriage. He spent 13 months out of the game, came back in 2003, and then enjoyed his best period, his best year of his Test career in 2004, where in 20 Test innings, Thorpe averaged 73 batting at 5. He was a brilliant character. After his playing career, he also had a huge influence on the current England team. He moved to Australia initially to begin his coaching career. In New South Wales, he influenced the likes of Steve Smith and David Warner there. And then he returned to England with his role at the ECB in 2010, and he was responsible for bringing through this generation of players we're seeing now. In particular, he influenced Ben Stokes in the way he plays spin, and he had a big role as well on Joe Root's career. And we saw those players paying their respects 2 years ago when we learned that Thorpe had fallen ill. Throughout that summer they paid their respects, and his illness and now his death will be deeply felt throughout this current England team. He is a huge loss. He was a legend of the game, both domestically and internationally, and the cricket community will be feeling his loss, gone way too soon at the age of just 55.
Thank you very much, James. Well, we've had lots of reaction to this sad news. Thorpe was well respected, not just for his playing career, but also as a coach, where he helped progress the careers of many of England's current stars. In June 2022, England Test captain Ben Stokes paid tribute to Thorpe ahead of the first Test against New Zealand at Lord's. Stokes wore a shirt with Thorpe and 564 on the back, which was Thorpe's Test cap number. Thorpe was actually in hospital at the time due to illness. And well, Stokes posted that same 564 shirt image this morning with a series of love heart emojis. Well, Stuart Broad posted this message on Instagram: genuinely gutted, loved Thorpe. As a kid, I would run in from the garden to watch him bat, the Kookaburra bubble and that famous knee-up pull shot. Got to know him through his coaching roles with England, and he was a wonderful person with a beautiful family, thinking of everyone who knew him today and everyone who was inspired by him. We'll have more reaction to that story throughout the afternoon here on Sky Sports News. But right now, we're going to turn our attention to transfers. And Conor Gallagher is flying to Spain ahead of a move to Atletico Madrid. And our reporter, Paul Gilmore, is actually at Stamford Bridge for us now. Paul, can you bring us up to speed? What's the latest on this deal?
Well, good afternoon. I can indeed. Of course, as we've known all weekend, an agreement has been in place between Atletico Madrid and Chelsea for the transfer of the England international Conor Gallagher. Atletico Madrid had set a deadline for Gallagher to decide. It's our information that 1 minute before this deadline, talking about leaving it fine or cutting it fine, Gallagher did decide he would indeed be able to make this move. He confirmed that he wanted to make this move from Chelsea, and he is now expected to fly to Madrid soon for a medical ahead of signing a 5-year contract. The fee is worth in the region of £34 million.
Paul, how did we get to this point where Chelsea are losing an England international, but not only an England international, one of their standout players from last season?
It's a good question. It's a question many will be asking because there are a lot of Chelsea fans who loved what Conor Gallagher did. There will be others who maybe not so much, but clearly he was a talking point. But there was no getting away from the fact that he was somebody who was a trier, somebody who gave everything while playing in the Chelsea shirt. And let's look back at this in chronological order. We know that Atletico Madrid's interest has been there throughout the window, and as recently as last week there was a big gap in valuation between the two clubs. The clubs then have agreed this fee in the region of £34 million. That is less than Chelsea's original valuation. So you've got to ask yourself why. And one of the reasons, our info is because Gallagher rejected a contract offer from Chelsea. Now, this offer was 2 years plus the option of one extra. And once Chelsea realised that Gallagher was not going to sign this contract extension, that's when they have caved in and dropped the price with Atletico Madrid. But of course there are two sides to every story. One source has told us that Gallagher was told he was going to be a squad player this season under Enzo Maresca. Naturally some fears that would harm his England ambitions. He's just back from the European Championship with England, where he did play under Gareth Southgate in some of the games in Germany, and Chelsea offered 2 years plus the option of an extra one. It's one of the reasons just to help ease those fears that he wouldn't be tied down to a long-term contract and those England ambitions would be harmed. But another source tells us Gallagher was offered a contract extension on 2 recent occasions. The first one was 4 days before the Euros, after Gallagher had rejected the chance to join Aston Villa. The second offer came just before Chelsea agreed the deal with Atletico Madrid on those reduced terms. Now, significantly in all of this, our info is that both of these offers were the same, both 2 years plus one, the same contract offer. We understand Gallagher would have signed a new long-term contract at Chelsea if he had been offered a similar contract length to other midfielders at the club. So we have become accustomed at Chelsea to seeing some of these longer-term contracts, 7 years plus the option of another one. So that was our understanding. So it's a complicated situation, but it's one that has finally looking like it has reached a conclusion, and that conclusion is Conor Gallagher is on his way to Madrid for a medical.
Thank you very much, Paul. Great to speak to you. Right, a big welcome to European football expert Andy Brassell, Dan Kahn and Dan Bardell in the studio with me. Let's talk Conor Gallagher then, Andy. Why would this move be beneficial for the player playing under someone like Diego Simeone?
Well, I think it felt like the writing was on the wall the moment that Mauricio Pochettino went, because clearly Chelsea wanted to make a profit from him for a while, and his biggest champion, the guy who stuck up for him in public all the time, went out the door. So I think for him, I would be really surprised if he hadn't spoken to Kieran Trippier about this, because Trippier has been quite vocal and quite clear on the personal and professional effect that going to Atletico had on him, the coaching of Diego Simeone and his staff, it made him a much better defender. There's no way that Trippier gets the opportunity to play at left back and left wing back for England if he's not given that defensive coaching from Simeone and his team in the first place. I think he really grew as a person. He could compete in the Champions League regularly. He was made to feel an important player. And he was someone whose natural qualities were not just fit in, but really built around there. And you can see the same thing for Conor Gallagher. Now, of course, we've seen him in more attacking positions, especially when he was on loan at Crystal Palace. But that energy was something he really brought to England when he was given the chance in the last year. And that's something that they really want to drill down on Atletico. So I think that's quite important. You look at the other midfield players they've got on the books, Marcos Llorente, Artur Vermeeren, who's going to be the future of the Belgian national team, Pablo Barrios, who's come out of their academy. These are all players who are expected to be more front foot sort of players. So I expect Gallagher will really work on the defensive side of his game here, and maybe, actually, especially with Calvin Phillips fading from the picture, that really helps him for England.
Yeah, I mean, and Dan, for Chelsea, he's not going to Tottenham. He's not going to a Premier League rival. Chelsea fans may not be happy about him going, but at least he's not going to one of their biggest Premier League rivals.
Yeah, you said that with a big smile on your face, the fact that he's not going to Tottenham.
Don't bring me into this.
but as you say, we know two Premier League clubs registered their interest in Conor Gallagher. We know Aston Villa had a bid accepted earlier this window for him. That move didn't materialise. We understand that fee was actually more than what Atletico have agreed with Chelsea as well. And it feels like Tottenham, with that other club, to have an interest in Gallagher. I think the interesting thing about this, though, is that Chelsea haven't been afraid to sell their players to rivals, have they? We've looked at Ian Maatsen earlier this window, Mason Mount last summer as well to Manchester United. But I think really the question is, when and if this transfer happens, I'm really eager to hear from Conor Gallagher himself, if he does an introductory press conference, news conference, to really hear his side of it. Because I think in this part of the story, we've not really heard his side. Why didn't he perhaps want to move to another Premier League club? Did he want to experience a different league, or was that decision out of his hands? I think hearing his side and his motivations will be really interesting.
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to hear his perspective. Whether we will or not, he might find it quite difficult to go to Atletico and then talk about it. But I think what we know about Conor Gallagher is he was Chelsea through and through. And I think if he was given the right contract, his aim over the last couple of transfer windows, we've been talking about Conor Gallagher. So it's sort of been up in the air where he's going. But if he'd have had a choice himself, I think everyone knows he's a Chelsea boy and he perhaps, would have wanted to stay at the club. Do you think... Are you surprised that Tottenham, Dan, haven't maybe gone more in for Conor Gallagher? Because he probably would have fit into their midfield perfectly, really. I
think usually in football, the people at board level of Spurs, the people that work on transfers, they'll get a feel as to whether something's going to be feasible or it's something that a player has an interest in. And my gut would be that I think Gallagher is very respectful of Chelsea, despite everything that's happened, and that he wouldn't see fit to move to a Premier League rival, a local rival as well, in Tottenham. And I think Gallagher really, Andy mentioned it there, I think it's about that refinement to his game. I think Gallagher's got a lot of the core attributes that Simeone would look for a midfielder in terms of his energy, the tempo in which he plays the game in. But it is that tactical side of things where I think Simeone will probably take his game on to a different level. He's going and he's experiencing a different league. So I think Gallagher will look at this as a chance to maybe go away and become a better footballer. And then maybe he can come back to the Premier League in a few years like Kieran Trippier did.
Do you see that happening, maybe? Him going to somewhere like Atletico Madrid, getting a few years there of playing in the Champions League, playing under Simeone, becoming a better player, like Dan says, but maybe then coming back to the Premier League?
That's what we saw with Kieran Trippier, wasn't it? And I think Newcastle have really, really benefited from the years that Kieran Trippier had at Atletico Madrid. It's not like they were getting him straight from Tottenham. They were getting a far more finished player, a far more cosmopolitan player, and a player who had the confidence to really be a leader as well. There were definitely those attributes in Conor Gallagher ready to be brought out, I think. And, Atletico are trying to get younger. He's got an enormous amount of energy, as Dan was saying, and I think that's absolutely huge. And, we can talk about him having the opportunity at Chelsea and Tottenham or Tottenham to push for the Champions League. He's going to get Champions League every year at Atletico. In terms of him really getting as good as he wants to get in the next couple of years, perfect for him.
I think that's a wise choice, Conor, going to Atletico Madrid. A date for the diary, the 29th of September, Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, Andy, Gallagher versus Bellingham. That's exciting, isn't it?
You're going to need the full 36 cameras to know everything that's going on in midfield at that point. There might be a little bit of skullduggery here and there. Who knows?
Dan, are you looking forward to that one? Gallagher versus Bellingham?
Yeah,
Did we ever think we were
absolutely.
seeing Gallagher versus Bellingham? I don't think anyone saw that.
I love how we're already creating the storylines. And La Liga hasn't even started yet. But I really think this is a great move for Gallagher because also I think we forget that, you know, at Chelsea, it has been a turbulent few years in terms of if you're a player there. You know, he has played under 5 different managers, temporary or permanent. So I think to be with Simeone. Also, we have to remember as well, Atletico don't spend this type of money regularly on big signings. I think he's the 5th most expensive signing under Simeone since he's been at the club in 2011. We can see some of the signings there. Perhaps they don't often spend the money because I think when we look at the list there, not a lot of them, I would say, have been deemed successful. I mean, Andy, you can look at that list and probably tell us more.
In fact, none of those, in
Matthew
fact.
said it.
I think all of those have really gone wrong for them. But they're going on a different route this summer. They do want to get younger. Antoine Griezmann at the moment is looking for a new contract. He's not getting it for the moment because they're like, do we want to give him everything he wants when he's 33 years old? So clearly that would leave some sort of energy vacuum in the middle of the team. I mean, you know, they might reevaluate that going forward. So they have needed a bit of a rebuild for a while. Simeone's been asking for this sort of rebuild for a bit of a while. But I do agree with what you were saying before. This is a pivotal moment for Conor Gallagher. And we heard Paul there saying how he left it to like the very last moment to make his mind up. They also had a backup at Atletico. They had Javi Guerra, a defensive midfielder who's 21 years old from Valencia. They agreed terms with him and they just sold him. Like basically, be ready for us if Conor Gallagher doesn't want to come. So he's probably not having the best morning.
No. Well, £34 million for a 24-year-old England international is pretty good from Atletico Madrid's perspective. Now, Conor Gallagher could be joined by Manchester City's Julian Alvarez. Atletico are in talks with City over a deal for him. They made an official approach over the weekend and negotiations are ongoing. PSG are also thought to be interested as well. Obviously, Julian Alvarez, we know how good he is, but which club, Andy, do you think he's more suited to, PSG or Atletico?
Well, it depends if you mean right at this moment or in the medium term, because he has an Atletico player written all over him. Simeone would love to get his hands on him. He loves those players who are that industrious. Having said that, someone was telling me yesterday that Julian Alvarez in his extremely long season, he played 74 games this season before the Olympics had started. Now, I think this tells you a couple of things. Firstly, if City, obviously they knew he was going to the Copa America, if they're willing to let, and it is let because it's outside the FIFA auspices, let him play at the Olympics, maybe they're not expecting to have him for this season. It's someone else's problem. I don't really know how you go from playing 74 games to probably having about half a week off and then going to play for Diego Simeone. I mean, that puts the Tough Mudder into perspective, doesn't it? It's going to be pretty tough for him. So I think he feels like an Atletico player for me. Of course, PSG are maybe moving to a slightly different sort of model now. You would argue that talent-wise, they've probably got what they already need in their squad, especially with João Neves arriving from Benfica this week. The question is, on a commercial level, they've lost Neymar, they've lost Mbappe, they've lost Messi in the space of a year. Do they need that superstar? Never mind what they actually need on the pitch. Are they going to need something bigger off the pitch? And is that maybe, you know, a certain Napoli number 9 shaped?
Ooh, Napoli number 9 shape. We might get onto that Napoli number 9.
Maybe.
Coming up, right, some transfer news from the WSL to tell you about quickly. Eve Annetz has joined Manchester City from Reading. The 18-year-old goalkeeper has signed a 4-year deal. And next up, Andy will tell us everything you need to know about West Ham's potential new signing, Nicholas Füllkrug. Welcome back. We've asked Andy to pick out 5 players to keep an eye on for this month. You mentioned the Napoli number 9, Andy, and that's where we're going to start. Victor Osimhen.
Yeah, you have to start with him, really, because his move potentially to the Premier League has been set up for a long time. So he signed a new contract in January, but it was really to do with providing him with a route out of Napoli, because you go back to last summer, this time last year, and Aurelio De Laurentiis, the very hard bargaining president of Napoli, said, look, if you want to talk to us about Osimhen, put your 200 million on the table and then we'll talk about it, which put off everyone apart from Saudi Pro League clubs. You know, even Europe's richest could not go anywhere there. So he signed this new contract in January, which gave him a release clause of 130 million euros. At that point, it brings all the Premier League clubs back into play. But this is before the PSR epiphany, which really changes things. And even PSG, who are very close to getting him, or have been very close to getting him, agreed personal terms with him about 3.5 weeks back. They're saying, well, we don't really want to go up to that release fee. Now, Napoli have got a problem, because obviously they want to please Antonio Conte. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but he likes a little bit of money to back him. That money is going to come from the sale of Victor Osimhen. And of course, Napoli are getting twitchy, A, because of that, and B, because when they gave Osimhen all these extra wages, it was like his gold watch, really, for his service, for helping them win the league a year and a half ago. They weren't expecting to pay it for more than 6 months. They really need to get rid of him now. Now, Romelu Lukaku is ready as ready can be to join up with Antonio Conte at Napoli, but it can't get done until they get rid of Osimhen. So really, there probably needs to be some sort of compromise between PSG and Napoli at some point, because, you know, we talked about that superstar that PSG could do with. Well, I think it's probably him, someone who had this absolutely magnetic attraction to all the from all the big name personalities like Drogba, like Eto'o at the African Cup of Nations. He could be that next superstar for PSG.
Do you not think he's, like 12, 18 months ago, I think there'd have been a huge list of teams that were interested in him, and now it feels like he's down to just Chelsea and PSG, who you've just mentioned. I feel like his stock's fallen quite dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months compared to where it was. Am I right in thinking that, or is that wrong?
I think you are right, but I don't think it's anything you can put on him. I think the fact is, you look at how Chelsea are trying to shift Lukaku, and that's because his contract is a bit anachronistic with what they're trying to do now. That's a 3 years ago contract. None of those players are getting paid, their signings, even the big money signings of the last couple of years, are getting paid anywhere near what Lukaku has been getting paid. And the problem is, with Osimhen, it's an expensive deal on a personal level. And he deserves that, I think, because of the personality he is, because of the player he is, because he's so incredibly Premier League ready. Now, I do wonder if there's a little bit of Fernando Torres about him, in that the Premier League will bring the best out of him, but it may well break him as well, because he puts his head in, you might have seen from the mask, in places where other people wouldn't put their feet. Are you going to get 38 Premier League games a season out of him when he's going full pelt? Because he will kind of attract injuries as well. And whether he ends up at PSG or he ends up at Chelsea, that is going to be an issue.
Do you think that would make him maybe favour a PSG move more? Because, you know, they're going to usually win the Ligue 1, they concentrate more on the Champions League and maybe roll him out for the Champions League games and the big games where they could kind of rest him more, whereas if Chelsea were to buy him, you'd feel like for the money and the wages they'd have to play him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a possibility. I mean, you know, if there's one thing about football in France, you will get kicked playing it, as Neymar found out. You know, people talk about injuries and lifestyle with Neymar. All his injuries are contact injuries because he's just too good and got kicked absolutely loads while he's in Paris. So I think, you know, he would need a bit of protection, Osimhen, and maybe that's leaving him out of the team for some domestic games, as you say.
Well, what about, and you mentioned him briefly there, the Romelu Lukaku leaving Chelsea's side of things. It's a case of, you know, he's on those incredibly huge wages that now doesn't fit in with their wage structure at all. So it's about getting him off the books. Yeah,
it is. And, you know, Italy's always where he's done his best work. Even though he's carrying an injury for the whole second half of last season, he was pretty good for Roma last campaign. I think Lewis Dunk still has the scars from that Europa League game where Lukaku really gave him the runaround at the Stadio Olimpico. But I think really it's about the relationship between Antonio Conte and between Lukaku. You know, Lukaku's played his best football under him. He got him incredibly fit with the programme that he had for him. He was unstoppable into maybe even the best number 9 at the world at that point in time. And that's what inspired Chelsea or persuaded Chelsea to pay all that money for him when we go back a couple of years. So look, it's clear that Lukaku is saying no to everything apart from working for Conte. He wants to get the most out of the next couple of years of his career, and he believes that Conte's the man to do it for him.
Yeah. What about Federico Chiesa then?
This is a really tough one, because I know Dan is an absolutely massive fan of his, and we all are when he's on it. But when is he on it? That's the question. Now, Thiago Motta has already said to him, the new Juventus coach, you're not part of my plans. Juventus know he's got a year left on his contract and just want to get something for him. Now, the latest is that they've dropped the asking price from about 25 million euros to around 15 million euros. OK, you're thinking bargain there. But from the exploratory talks he's had with Premier League clubs, Chelsea have been connected with him, but he had talks with the people around Spurs, or his people had talks with the people around Spurs last week. And they were quite surprised at the amount of wages he was asking, particularly with how inconsistent he's been in the 3 years since he was so brilliant at Euro 2020, because he's had a cruciate knee ligament injury in that time. His development has really slowed. And I think you look at the start of this summer, when Roma agreed a fee for him, and he said, well, I'm on holiday, I can't talk at the moment, kind of leaving his options open. So they went, OK, fair enough, we'll go and get someone else. And they went and signed Matthias Soulé, who was a target for Leicester. And they've just got on with the rest of their window. And it kind of feels to me that this window, and maybe to an extent the top level of European football, is leaving Chiesa behind a little bit.
A bit like Zaniolo.
Yes.
Same kind of thing happened, didn't it?
I mean, that's a danger. I think you've got to be looking at that for sure.
OK, Youssoufa Moukoko.
Who, again, talking of contracts that are sort of something from a bygone era, Dortmund were really keen to keep him. Of course, the youngest player in Bundesliga history, the youngest goal scorer in Bundesliga history, at 16 years old. Now 19, broke all sorts of goal scoring records for Dortmund, under 15, under 16 level, for Germany under 21s as well. But has really struggled to develop his game over the last couple of years, even with a coach who was really sympathetic to him in Edin Terzic, the former assistant to Slaven Bilic at West Ham. Now, his agent came out and kicked off last week, Patrick Williams, about he's not had the chance that Dortmund promised him in terms of minutes. He's not developed enough, really, to have those minutes. We know he's a terrific finisher. We know Marseille are very interested in him, and he's interested in going there. Lille are trying to gazump that deal at the moment. At one point, Premier League clubs would have been all over him. But he earns $8 million a year. It's another expensive deal for someone who's still relatively unproven.
And staying in Germany then, what about Bayern's Leon Goretzka?
Now, you know how Premier League teams, Olivia, have had this problem for years and years. When they want to clear the decks, it's the toughest thing to do, because those players earn so much money. Where do you place them? Now, Bayern have operated in a similar space to Manchester City in recent years. So they've gone out and they've not spent 150 million on players, but the wages are absolutely huge. Their wage bill is quite a lot bigger than when Pep Guardiola was in charge at Bayern, for example. But now you have a problem when you want to move on from Goretzka, when you're considering moving on from Joshua Kimmich, although they've started contract talks with him for the first time in a while. It looked like he would leave this summer, but maybe he'll stay. And other ones like Matthias de Ligt, for example, it's very, very difficult to get the money back that you want and to get all of those wages off the wage bill, because you're probably asking, in the current climate, the players to abdicate some of those wages.
All right, we have a quick line from the Championship for you. Leeds United are interested in signing Norwich City winger Jonathan Rowe. Right, on the way, we'll have news from Manchester United as they target a right-back and the centre-back that Andy might have just been talking about. West Ham are closing in on 2 signings. Nicholas Füllkrug has completed his medical ahead of his £27.5 million move from Borussia Dortmund. He will sign a 3-year contract with the option of a further year. Guido Rodriguez is a free agent after he left Real Betis. He too had a medical this weekend. Andy, tell us about Nicholas Füllkrug. We sort of saw glimpses, didn't we? With him playing for Germany at the Euros, and obviously those who have watched Dortmund every single week will know what he's like. But tell us a little bit more.
Well, he's got an enviable goal-scoring record at international level straight away. And I think you look at him and people who have a nodding acquaintance with his body of work will say he'll work really well in the Premier League because he's big and he's great in the air, which is all true. But there's more to him than that. He's pretty quick as well, especially for a 31-year-old big lump, if you like. He's got a brilliant first touch. He's a great finisher from all sorts of angles, very decisive. And he's really peaked in the last couple of years because I think if you look at him earlier in his career, he was very highly rated, but held back by a lot of injuries. And it looked like it would never happen for him at elite level. And then you look at the last 2 years. Joint Bundesliga top scorer with Werder Bremen, gets his move at 30 to that elite level, Borussia Dortmund. And despite all the other stuff that's going on around him, very, very dysfunctional on the pitch, he manages to be really, really good, helps them get to the Champions League final. I think this is a deal that kind of works for everyone because despite the fact he's 31, despite the fact he's had injuries, what that means is he's actually got quite a lot left in the tank, actually, because he's not played as much football as he might have done earlier in his career, certainly not at the top level and certainly not 50-odd games a season. So I think that works in West Ham's favour. For Dortmund, they've just bought Serhou Guirassy, who's 4 years younger than him, who scored more goals in the Bundesliga than anyone else but Harry Kane last season. So that's good for them. And they make a big old profit on Füllkrug after this 1 year.
Andy, because in Germany now, he's almost become this cult hero. Everyone loves him, one of those rare players that whoever you support in the Bundesliga, everyone loves him. It's taken him a while to get to that kind of level. I was really surprised with this. I was surprised that he's chose to go now, bearing all that in mind.
Yeah, well, I guess, Dan, the thing is that he's been very happy this year at Dortmund and he really connected with the supporters as well because almost since Jurgen Klopp left, they've missed that sort of blood and thunderness. Now, look, he's not a replacement for Klopp in any way, but they're from that same sort of lineage in that he's got that sort of normal bloke vibe to him. He doesn't have that academy product sheen. You know, he looks like he's been in the wars, not to put too fine a point on it. And I think that's really mattered to Dortmund fans. Now, they weren't desperate to sell him. They were waiting for West Ham to make them an offer that they couldn't really refuse on a 31-year-old with 2 years left on his contract. That's the way that they looked at it, especially after they got Guirassy. And there was the sense that once they did get Guirassy, well, they're only really playing with one centre-forward. That they could play them as a two now and then, but that's not really the way that Nuri Sahin, the new coach, wants to play. And that's not the way a lot of coaches want to play these days, is it? So it just feels like, a happening of circumstance, I suppose.
Yeah, well, obviously West Ham looking to the Bundesliga for Nicholas Füllkrug. Manchester United are doing the same because they remain in talks with Bayern Munich over the signings of right-back Noussair Mazraoui and centre-back Matthias de Ligt. There is a gap in valuation that exists between what Bayern want for the players and what Manchester United are prepared to pay. What do you make of those two deals then, Andy?
Mazraoui, I think Bayern are going to do well to get a lot of money for someone who's really not good enough to be in their 11. He's a good player, but he's not an elite level player. De Ligt is different because we know De Ligt has got the talent to be one of the best centre-backs in the world. But what he hasn't had is a consistent run at a club who wants to play him all the time. You know, he left Ajax and you thought this guy is going to be one of the 2-3 best centre-backs in the world. It didn't quite happen for him for Juventus, probably because you think, OK, he's going to end up under the wing of Bonucci and Chiellini, but you've got to get past them first, which is a difficult thing. And then it hasn't quite worked at Bayern because they've had a lot of other defensive issues. But if you were going to make a case for him to go to Manchester United, it's like build the defence around me for the next 5-6 years, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's another player, as we've spoken about, that Erik ten Hag knows, of course, very well from his time in the Eredivisie. I think my wonder for you, Andy, is we really don't know what United's best 11 is, do we?
No.
Nevertheless, their defence, they had so many issues there last season with all the injuries they had. I just wonder, on paper, you're probably thinking their starting full or defence would be Diogo Dalot, Andrea Onana, of course, in goal, Sandro Martinez, De Ligt, and then Luke Shaw once he's back from his break at the Euros. Do you think that back four, back five is enough for United to compete?
But it looks pretty good to me. And I guess the fact that if you were to have De Ligt there as well, you've got the option of, if you want to, playing a three. I don't think they will, but they have the option of doing that, and it's all about options. You could move Lisandro Martinez into a sort of midfield anchor role if you wanted as well. And that's what you want, really, isn't it? That sort of flexibility. And obviously, United are hoping to play as many games as possible this season. So everyone's going to get their game time in there. I just want to see De Ligt go somewhere where he's going to spend 4, 5 or 6 years and be a key player. And then we'll see the player that we always thought he could be, perhaps.
I really wish the camera had been on Dan Khan's face when Andy, you said that Mazraoui wasn't good enough to get in Bayern's 11. He was shaking his head. He was not happy. Dan, where else do Manchester United then need to strengthen, do you think?
I just think midfield. I think at the moment, if you look at the makeup of their squad, I don't think they've got an ideal partner for Mainu. If you're going to kind of build your midfield around Mainu, which is what I think they should do, I don't think at the moment they've got that ideal partner for him. Casemiro captain Manchester United against Liverpool in their last pre-season friendly, but by all accounts, by the sounds of things, didn't have a great time. He's very much on the wane. You look at where he was last season, nowhere near the levels of the season before. Amrabat, they didn't take up the chance to sign him permanently, so there's a definite gap for a central midfielder next to Mainu, but there's a few areas. I really think De Ligt would be a really, really good signing for Manchester United. I think on the face of it, you could look at it and say, oh, another player Ten Hag's worked with, another Dutch player. But I genuinely believe it's different to all those other signings. I think he still can become one of the most elite centre-halves in the game. I think he's got everything you would really want from a centre-half. I think he just needs a home, like Andy says. But I still think Manchester United have done OK in the transfer window so far, but I still think there's a couple of areas they could do with strengthening.
Yeah, United after a centre-back then, or could another centre-back who's an England international be on his way to Newcastle? We'll discuss that after this break. Welcome back. Andy's picked out 5 European teams to talk about. It's been a busy summer for Bayern already, hasn't it, Andy?
Yeah, and it's a sort of strange shape of summer because it took them ages to get a coach. They eventually get Company on board, and we'll see how that turns out. But look, he's got all the tools that you could possibly want for the moment. Think of the arrival of Paulinho, who they wanted to get last summer. Elise is absolutely huge for them, having a great Olympics with France at the moment as well. Ito, the centre-back, the fact that they've signed him to solve a lot of their problems, and he's done his knee straight away in pre-season, is really quite unfortunate. But you get the feeling they haven't finished. For them, it's about getting players off the books. So to get rid of Goretzka, to get rid of Gnabry. Now, like I said, Kimmich might be holding on and they might be keeping him. But at some point, they're going to have to start shedding some of these big wages, and it's going to be tough to do that.
What about, we were just debating over the age of Serge Gnabry. He is, in fact, 29 years old. I
was right.
Yeah, you were right.
There we go.
I think he's been around for what about PSG then? Obviously, it's going to be a big summer for them, having lost Kylian Mbappe. What else has been going on?
Well, the question over whether they get Osimhen is the big one. João Neves is arriving in the next day or two, who will make a massive difference to their midfield because, you know, they lack that little bit of craft in midfield, which is kind of a hangover from having a front three that absolutely does it all, really. So they have to replace that superstar quality, and they have to move closer and closer to what Luis Enrique wants. Now, in the medium term, I think that probably means a move for Gigi Donnarumma, because he is a goalkeeper who we know is a great goalkeeper, and that would have been undisputed 10 years ago. He's not good enough with his feet for a Luis Enrique team. So that is a problem. So where he might end up next, we've heard him linked with Manchester City. Now, if he's not good enough with his feet for Luis Enrique, he's definitely not good enough with his feet for Pep Guardiola. But I think where he eventually ends up is an interesting question.
Chelsea haven't signed a goalkeeper for 10 minutes, so...
There we go then.
Real Madrid, do they need anyone else? Surely not. Their squad's brilliant.
Yeah, it's almost shut their window. Of course, they've spent a lot on Kylian Mbappe's package and wages to get him arrive. Of course, Endrick has also arrived, so maybe there'll be an out. Maybe Rodrigo might find his way out at some point. I wonder if he would end up at a Premier League destination in the medium term. In terms of reinforcing that defence, they're really banking on David Alaba coming back and coming back strongly. But you're right, they've got so many options in midfield, especially, of course, with Luka Modric extending for an extra year. Yeah,
heading over to Italy then. What about Juventus?
Well, Juventus and Roma are sort of in the same sort of boat, really. They've been looking to get younger, just as Atletico Madrid have been doing. We talked about Conor Gallagher coming in to be the new heart of that midfield. Thiago Motta is the new coach at Juventus, and he wants to basically make them a little bit more zesty. One of the reasons he's getting rid of Chiesa, for example. Kefren Turam, who's so strongly linked with Liverpool last summer, he's arrived at the club that his dad used to play for. And then you look at Roma, who under Jose Mourinho sort of stockpiled these players of enviable talent who couldn't really stay fit, and that's why they ended up at Roma in the first place. So Paulo Dybala has stayed on, and that's great if he's got more athletic players around him. We talked about Matteo Soulé, who's come from Juventus, who was great on loan at Frosinone last summer, turned down a move to Leicester, who were prepared to pay quite a lot more than Roma for him because he only wanted Roma. And Artem Dovbyk, the guy who was the top scorer in their Liga last season, rejected Atletico Madrid so he could lead the line for Roma. That will probably mean a move for Tammy Abraham in the next couple of weeks.
Perfect. Right, those were 5 European clubs that Andy picked to talk about. Let's head back to the Premier League, where Newcastle have made contact with Crystal Palace over a potential deal for England defender Mark Guehi. However, the fee could be an issue. Dan, I mean, are you surprised by this? Can you see this happening? Can you see Guehi going to Newcastle?
I mean, I don't think you can be surprised by Mark Guehi being linked to a club like Newcastle based off his Euros performances. You know, and he also had a very good, strong end to the season with Crystal Palace under Glasner as well. I think it probably surprised everyone how well he was able to perform at an international tournament with all that pressure on him, you know, replacing the likes of Harry Maguire in that England side. I think the interesting thing for Guehi and also Newcastle is maybe it does make a lot of sense, because when you look at Newcastle's options, Sven Botman, of course, he kind of injured his ACL towards the end of last season in the FA Cup, so not expecting him to return till the end of the calendar year. Fabian Schär's now 32 years old, I think probably waning a little bit in his powers, although he's been so consistent in the Premier League. So Mark Guehi would be someone who you could start building your new defence around potentially, which is a slightly ageing defence with Kieran Trippier as well. So it feels like this could make sense. I suppose the one question is the price, because we know Jared Branthwaite was going for around, his price tag was around £60 million. You'd probably put Mark Guehi in that bracket as well, because he's still relatively young. So
He's
I'm
got
not sure.
2 years left on his contract, so
Yeah.
probably makes it slightly different. Makes
Yeah.
it an easier get than Branthwaite,
Yeah,
for example.
but maybe he doesn't have the potential as Branthwaite, but he comes with the experience,
Yeah.
and he comes into that defence as a leader. So I'm not sure what you think, Andy. But
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, Guehi would be a great get for Newcastle if they could get him. I just wonder if Palace give the slightest hint that they're prepared to negotiate. Does that mean, say, a Liverpool step in instead? All of a sudden he's got options, and maybe preferable options from his point of view. But look, I think Newcastle would be really wise to get this deal over the line if they could now, because I think he's only going to get more expensive, really, as we get for the rest of this window. As you say, if we're talking about Palace harvesting the maximum fee for him, this is the summer in which to do it. But I think there will be offers from other clubs. He was so great during the Euros. And I agree, Dan. I think probably him and Botman is what you're looking at medium term. Until Botman's fit again, Schär is very, very reliable. But I think Newcastle have got no European football. They've got a chance to really attack the top four in the first half of this season, especially when you look at the extended format of the European competitions. You've got to be taking advantage of the tiredness of some of these teams, which is going to be a little tough to cope with, I think.
Yes, well, will Mark Guehi be on his way to Newcastle? We will keep you up to date on that transfer. Right, Good Morning Transfers is back for you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Transfer Talk returns tomorrow at midday. And for a full roundup of all the day's news, you can catch the Transfer Show tonight at 5 and 7 p.m. Andy, Dan, thank you so much. Coming up, we're live to the Oval to reflect on the sad news that former England cricketer Graham Thorpe has passed away.